City Matters.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I am your host, Rich Acritelli, and on today's episode of The Fog of War and Humanity here on hmTv, my special guest is Mike McClure, will join me for a conversation about his time in the United States Army Special Forces. Mike, let's get started. Where did you grow up, and what did you like to do as a kid?
I grew up in North Massapequa here on Long Island. I went to high school at Farmingdale, and I played sports, mostly cross country and track. And during the winter, I participated with the wrestlers just to stay in shape.
Okay. What year did you graduate? Was it Massapequa? Or was it
Farmingdale.
Farmingdale
I graduated Farmingdale High School in 1971.
So at the end of the Vietnam War. Now,
Yes.
You're a veteran. Did you go right into the Army, or did you wait?
I waited. I I attempted to go to college for a while.
Okay.
But it really didn't suit me. I went to Paul Smith's College of Forestry, upstate New York. But it didn't really work out for me. I wasn't very much interested in it.
What did you major in for a time?
It was forestry.
Oh, forestry
Yeah,
itself.
I was shooting for a 4-year degree, but I just didn't fit in with it. I was too young for college.
Okay.
And when I dropped out, I did drop out at the beginning of my second year. I went out on the West Coast for a number of years working in the logging community, and I had to move on to something that was better. And I was about 21 when I enlisted in the Army.
Where in the West Coast did you work?
I was out at North Bend, Washington, and then Port Angeles.
Okay.
That's where I...
A little bit different than Farmingdale, right?
A little different than Farmingdale.
Okay.
A little hillier, and the trees were a little bigger.
And you're always an active guy, right? You always
Yes.
like to run and grapple, but wrestling and
Right.
staying in shape.
Right.
So, all right, so you're 21 years old. You go into the service. Where do you start out at?
I had come back home to Massapequa, and I enlisted here on Long Island.
Okay.
And I initially enlisted as a combat engineer with an identifier of atomic demolitions munitions. And that was in April of 1975.
All right, so it's the end of the Vietnam War.
Right
kinda-
before it fell,
Yeah,
right
right.
before the helicopters were evacuating
Right before
everybody.
Saigon falls. We're
Yes.
already out of there for about 2 years.
Yes.
Not a great time for the service. We're kind of, a lot of people kind of wanted to put the war behind us and everything.
Correct.
Now, where do you end up doing your basic?
All right. I got inducted at Fort Dix.
Okay.
Then I went to basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
All right, so Fort Lost in the Woods, right?
Fort Lost in the Woods. And that was for the 12 Bravo straight combat engineer training.
Okay.
After that, for the 12 Echo identifier, which was atomic demolitions munitions, I was sent to Fort Belvoir for the 3-week course there.
Is that Virginia?
Yes,
Okay.
Fort Belvoir, Virginia, right outside Washington, D.C.
Now, you're a Farmingdale kid.
Yes.
You go out to Washington State, so you're going from one extreme to another. And now you're out in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, which is middle America.
Right.
What would you say about Fort Leonard Wood?
They call it Fort Lost in the Woods for a reason. And during that era, we were pretty much restricted staying on base because the local community wasn't
Didn't like the
friendly
military,
to military people at all. That was the beginning of my notice at how civilians treated the military during that era.
Yeah,
So-
I was there in 1994, and not much has changed.
Oh, okay.
They told us for any reason that you're off the military base and there shouldn't be one, they don't really like anyone down there.
Right. They would take
So,
advantage of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
In a heartbeat.
but you're in the Ozark Mountains, you're in
Right.
the Mark Twain National Forest.
Right.
And, you always kind of heard explosions going off at being one of the
Yep.
largest engineering bases.
All the basic stuff that the engineers did, we did there. And I was there in the summer, the building Bradley bridges, explosives, rigging, all the stuff putting in minefields, all the type stuff that a normal combat engineer does.
Now, being in good shape, right? You're an older man now, and you're still in great shape. How is the start of the Army training for you?
I didn't really have much problem with it. I was a little bit more mature than some of the kids just out of high school, the younger men out of high school, and I was used to working hard.
Yeah.
It wasn't being a highly a high lead logger out on the West Coast, and the felling and the bucking and all the stuff that you do, you have to be in good shape.
Yeah, you were lean and you were tough, right?
Right.
So, all right. So now you go to Virginia. What was that school like? In terms of
That was mostly classwork. We worked with two systems they called the Special Atomic Demolition Munition, which was an airdroppable. It was the old warhead from the Nike warheads, from the Nike missiles.
Okay.
And then the Medium Atomic Demolition Munition, and they're both about the same size as what happened in World War
and we
II.
had a bunch of those Nike sites here on Long Island. you
Yeah.
know? Not
Well,
too far from here in Glen Cove, and
Yeah.
then I think up towards Fort Totten and Bayside, Queens. So
But that was mostly in-class technical work.
Okay.
And the MOS, you had to do your assemblies and disassemblies and the timers. It was very detailed. You had to follow specific rules, and it was a two-man rule with everything when you're working with your men. And,
what were the instructors like for?
very professional. Most of everybody, when I went into service, were Vietnam veterans. And those are the guys that taught me how to be a soldier.
Wow.
Excellent NCOs, excellent officers.
Yeah, in the back of their mind is always
Right. They were very professional, very strict. It was, and they weren't easygoing. They put it to you as a soldier if you didn't do the right thing.
Sure.
Right.
Okay.
But they were professionals.
Now-
all of them.
You're there. What would be one of the harder things that you had to do at Belvoir there?
It was a technical work, but you didn't have to be. Most of the manuals were written at an 8th grade level, but you had to follow specific procedures for everything that you did. A lot of it I forgot because I stopped doing it in the 1980s when the MOS went away.
Now, what was the name of that job again?
You were a 12 Echo,
Okay.
Atomic Demolition Munitions.
And they wrote it pretty friendly.
It was
in
very
terms of,
strict. You were part of the I'm not pronouncing it. You had to pass drug tests. You had to have a background investigation, and you ended up having a top secret clearance.
Clearance there.
So, and if you screwed around, you were sent to the regular engineers. If
Yeah.
you got busted for drugs or you were a discipline problem,
Which was bad at that time. I mean, you had a lot of discipline problems, drugs, alcohol.
I noticed that
gangs in the military in the mid-70s.
Right. There was a lot of problems within the military.
Discipline-wise,
Right. Because it was the tail end of Vietnam, and most people will tell you the NCO Corps and the Officer Corps were pretty much decimated because of Vietnam, and a lot of guys got out because of the atmosphere in the States. But the guys that I dealt with were professionals.
Sure, they wanted to be there.
It was at the lower ranking people that normally had the problem.
Sure.
And there was still some draftees in the military when I went in.
Yeah.
You were dealing with some of them. But some stayed in, and they were outstanding.
Yeah, and they ended up making a career out of it.
Right.
Okay. All right, so now you're in Virginia. Where do you go after that?
When I graduated from that school, I was sent to Germany, to the 275th Engineer Company, ADM,
Okay.
in Ludwigsburg, Germany.
What year was that?
That was late 1975, almost into 76.
Wow. Okay, so you're what, 22, 23 years
I
old?
was
at the
still
point?
21.
21 there?
Right.
Okay.
So I went over there. I enlisted in April, all the training and everything, and I turned 22 when I was over in Germany.
What did you think of Germany when you were over there?
The Cold War was still going on. A lot of GIs, a lot of military, Air Force, there was all sorts of units. I was at a relatively small base in a relatively small town. But I found that the atmosphere was, for the military there, how we were treated by the West Germans because of the threat they had from, the Eastern Bloc.
Sure.
They were friendly.
What?
You had to be careful because of still there was terrorism going on with the Red Brigade in that era and all the stuff going on.
It really was a rough time because
Yeah.
you had terrorism in Central and Western Europe. You had gangs within the American military.
Yes.
You had racial concerns that
Right.
was still going on. Drugs and alcohol were at a very high rate.
Mm-hmm.
The morale was down, and the government just carried out perhaps our longest war, right?
Yep.
And they're trying to get away from Vietnam, and they cut back on the spending and everything else. They're just trying to keep everything at bay.
Right.
Now, what part of Germany was that considered? Where were you?
I was in the Stuttgart area.
And that's
southern Germany.
Southern Germany itself there? Okay.
Right. Schwabia, I think is the pronounced.
How did you like the German people?
I had no problem with them all. I had, as a whole, when you were in the community and found them to be, they knew you were in military, you stuck out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, sure.
The hardest thing is culture shock for a young person.
Yeah.
And you got to learn the language. But I spent a total of almost 15 years over in Germany throughout my military career.
So you picked up on the language pretty well?
Well, as best I could. Sure. I wasn't very good at foreign language, but I did the best I could.
Now, were you able to get one of those Euro passes and go throughout a lot of Europe?
I just used my ID card whenever we went anywhere. But a young guy, I didn't really go on very many tours.
Okay.
I was mostly soldiering when I was over there. Not a vacation.
No, I know that. But were you able to go to some of the other countries?
I remember going into France, southern France, and seeing places like that.
Okay.
When during that time where Third Army graveyard is, where
General
Patton was buried.
Yeah.
Southern Germany, seeing that.
You went to Luxembourg there, right? To see Patton.
And then where we trained in more up where the Rhine Bridge was. The Remagen Bridge. I remember we trained in that area and went and visited that. But that was our regular because we were training.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And during your downtime, you got to see the local community.
Did you have any officers that served during World War II that were still in Germany there, or
not that I remember?
Not you remember.
There's a couple of guys I remember. George Patton's son was one of our commanders at a time. And there was one other commander, I keep forgetting his name.
Was he a full-bird colonel?
He was the one that became the African-American that was Secretary of Defense. He was over there during that time.
Okay.
Period.
Was it Colin Powell?
Yeah, I believe he was one of the
Joint
commanders.
Chiefs?
He was, I think he was in charge of, one of the top guy in Europe at the time.
Now,
but you go through all these names and commanders, and you mostly just remember the people you're with. And, some people have really good long-term memory, and I remember some things, but it's easy to forget.
Sure. Now, Patton's son, did you ever speak with him, or you saw him up close?
He came to our unit a couple of times because of how important we were for placing obstacles in the Fulda Gap. The Fulda Gap was the main attack route that the Russians were going to use, they thought, to invade Western Europe.
Okay.
And our job was to place obstacles
to slow them down.
Slow them down, stop.
Now, you're at that base. What's the next thing that you end up doing?
We would train continuously, going to the 3 major training areas in Germany, and also our security and a unit that supported us. We were 5- and 6-man teams that were in place in these munitions. Was a German engineer unit, was all our support, meaning transportation, security, convoy security, and things like that. Okay. And some of our exercises, even we were using trainers. So the Americans had to maintain control of them, just like they were a real nuclear weapon. And the Germans would be our security. And I remember we would do convoys with the trainers, and we're in German vehicles with Americans riding in the back of the trucks. The German MPs clearing the roads and helicopter support and all that kind of thing, just like we were doing the real thing. And going to sites, to these bridges that had to be destroyed, or where we were placing we would do an explosion to put a big crater. And a lot of these targets already were pre-dug and pre-hollowed out to place those munitions.
Were the Germans good to work with?
Yes. Yeah, excellent. They did have a draft army at that time.
And they were glad to see you guys over there, too.
Of course,
because they knew you were tied to the defense.
Right. Their NCOs, the soldiers, we had no problem getting along.
And they
realized...
spent
a lot of time in the German the Germans club, the army club, drinking, pretty
beer
cheap
signs,
beer, like 25 cents or 50 cents for a liter of beer. Which
now, they must have been happy that you were there in terms of the Cold War, and that
yes,
they knew that
right.
as long as you were there, It's most likely not going to be a
And because of their proximity to the border, where Stuttgart, we weren't real close to the Ludwigsburg, we weren't real close to the border. But when we were in training with the Germans, they would take us on the border tours, and you would see the
and you would see East Germany
border.
and everything.
Right.
What did you think of that? What comes to your mind when you think of
East Germany, with the oppression that went on, and being under Soviet control, and how strict they were? Yeah, it was a rough area.
Okay.
And later on in my career, I actually, after the Cold War, we had a baseball tournament that took place in the Czech Republic. And we were all of us kids and the adults on the trains going to the Czech Republic, and how strikingly different East Germany was from Western Germany when you crossed. It was gray.
Wow.
There wasn't much activity yet. And then when you cross into the Czech Republic, it was like being in a brand new country. Utterly, because under the oppression of East Germany, everything deteriorated.
Sure. And there's not much motivation under a communist system.
Right. Correct.
And you really look at like West Germany, you really kind of see that they won the Cold War in terms of between them and East Germany.
Correct.
East Germany was backward. They didn't have a lot of technology, a lot of resources.
That's why people were trying to get away.
Yeah.
And a lot of them paid with their lives.
Yeah.
And the border was to keep people in, not...
Did you ever go to Berlin? Were you ever
no,
there?
I never had the opportunity to go to Berlin.
Okay.
Most of Germany I saw throughout the years.
When you're done there, where do you end up going?
With the 275th?
Yeah.
Okay. After I was there maybe a total of 6-7 years, I was transferred to Fort Hood, Texas.
So you come back,
right?
Then.
Come back. A 66 engineer company, ADM, and I spent about a year and a half there at Fort Hood. Then I was rotated back to Germany, but this time I was sent to northern Germany, which was the British sector, and it was both an artillery and an engineer platoons there that had the nukes to conduct, do the same type thing. Artillery was nuke, and the platoon I was in was nuclear.
Did you notice a difference between the American and the British sectors there?
I think we were the same. My kids went to the British school. We ate in this I ate in a German mess hall, but we would have the British unit we interacted with a lot in their mess hall and their mess.
What was it like raising kids over in Germany, especially during the height of the Cold War?
Yeah, it was. The Department of Defense schools there are excellent because they really got the top grade teachers into the system. And my kids were given a wide, because of culture, a wide variety of cultures that they were in.
A lot of good experiences, right?
And what's funny is because they were in an English school after about a year, I was only there about a year and a half, because when they picked up English accents, which was funny. And when I was there, it was Nienburg on the Weser. That was the name of the town. They did away with the atomic demolition munitions, MOS, because of the cruise missiles and the accuracy and everything. It changed all that.
Okay.
So from there, I was intercountry transferred to the 82nd Engineer Battalion, straight 12 Bravo, a combat engineer unit, mechanized, in Bamberg, Germany. And when I was there probably about another year and a half. You do a lot of moving around in the military. I went from a highly technical to a more combat arms MOS. And it was newly mechanized because the Bradleys had just come out and they gave us the renovated APCs.
What year would that be around?
I'm trying to think. It's about 83, 84. And while I was in Bamberg, I was sent to the Advanced Non-Commissioned Officers course, once again at Fort Belvoir, the home of the engineers.
Sure.
And there I was exposed to some 18 series soldiers, Special Forces series soldiers.
Now, let me ask you.
I was an E6 promotable at the time.
Before you get into the Special Forces here, you're in the military in 1975. Now it's 1983.
83, 84. Maybe. Yeah, about 84, 85.
Right? Now you start seeing the arms build up under Reagan.
Correct.
So it must have been noticeably different, right?
I want to bring up something. Reagan saved my military career, and he probably saved the military and how he upgraded it and and go into an all-volunteer force like we did, because it cleaned up the military completely.
Yeah,
the
people that didn't
equipment
want to
we
be
were
there.
working for, the new equipment I got, we were in Bamberg, because we went from old trucks to these modernized APCs,
Sure.
all reworked. And the morale in the military was much higher, and the quality of the soldiers coming in was much higher, because they enforced standards.
Yeah.
That was standards.
Well, Reagan's two main goals when he became president was to rebuild the economy and rebuild the
Right.
military.
Right.
And there's no way that a communist country that can't feed their own people
Correct.
with milk, bread, eggs, butter,
Right.
cheese, whatever,
Correct.
is going to
Right.
defeat the United States.
Correct.
And
Right.
he pretty much kicked in the structure of communism.
Right.
So,
Right.
all right. So now we're looking at the special forces.
Correct.
Where do you kind of pick up on that, or where do you get involved
When
with that?
I was at Fort Belvoir at the course, a couple of Special Forces soldiers approached me and said, "You ought to come in with us."
Did you ever think about that when you were a young kid and you were thinking about the military?
Did I ever think of Special Forces? No.
Did that ever come into your mind?
No. A lot of people, as things are thrown your way and you become aware of it, you sleep on it a little bit and make up your mind.
Sure.
Now, there was a certain period of time, there was a drawdown in the military, but Special Forces was expanding. And after attending the course,
Where was the course at?
Fort Belvoir,
Okay.
the engineer school, home of the engineers. I returned to Germany, and that's when I volunteered for Special Forces.
All right. So now,
And I'm an E6 promotable about at that time.
so now you're an NCO.
Correct.
You're back in Germany.
Yes.
Does the United States military have training in Germany for the special forces?
No.
So
Fort
you have
Bragg.
Fort Bragg, then.
Right. First, you have to go through airborne school at Fort Benning, and then Fort Bragg. So I was dragging my family all over the place.
Sure, sure.
But they were used to it. It was
Yeah.
quite an experience. It was an adventure. You're young. It's not like when you're older and set completely in
Yeah.
the thing. They're used to moving one location to another. And
When you go to Fort Bragg, how long does that take you?
it's a year.
It's a year. Okay.
Fort Benning, the jump school is 3 weeks. Ground week, tower week, jump week.
Okay.
Best school the Army has.
Now, you had instructors from Vietnam War? Or?
There was some left over, but they were more senior NCOs, not guys that outrank me.
Now,
Most of them were still,
what was probably some of the biggest challenges that you had to face in jump school at Bragg there?
Fort Benning is where jump school
Fort
is.
Benning, excuse me.
I loved it. It was great. They were totally professional NCOs. It's a great school, highly motivated, and they're motivating you. They're not harassing you.
Sure.
They're treating you, you're a volunteer, and drop and give me 10 or drop and give me 20, whatever. If you do it with a grain of salt, you're good to go. A lot of people, the littlest, teeniest girl I saw was maybe 5'2". Yes, airborne sergeant, and laughing the whole way.
Sure,
And they would get through, and then you have somebody with a bad attitude, thinks it's baloney,
Yeah.
they quit.
Well, attitude's a lot in the military.
Yeah.
If you make if it's good,
If you
then
want
you'll
to
be all
do
right.
it,
If
and
it's
you're
bad,
motivated, you're going to do it.
yeah. If it's
know?
bad, it's going to be bad for you. You know?
Right.
So,
You're doing a lot of PT, you're doing a lot of push-ups, you're doing a lot of PLFs, meaning parachute landing falls.
okay.
But they keep you motivated. You don't get a lot of sleep, but it's great.
How many jumps did you make?
In my career,
In your career.
50 total about.
Okay.
Right. No, I wasn't as active as somebody in the 82nd Airborne Division or some of the other.
But you were
because I
doing
was
different
in
jobs too.
Yeah, right.
Okay. But you got
Yeah.
the patch on there and you got
Right.
on your uniform and everything,
Right.
and it's got to be a sense of pride.
you're still you're a paratrooper.
Okay.
So.
To this day, do you ever do any jumps on your own? Or,
No. I did it in the military. It was
And that was
part of
good
my
enough?
job in the
Yeah.
training. And it was a great experience.
Okay. And what's probably one of your fondest memories of Benning itself there?
Of Benning, just getting through and doing them jumps. Now, I was as apprehensive as anybody else to get on going in that door. But once you do it, it motivates you.
Is your first jump the toughest one?
I don't know. I think that you're probably the most apprehensive, and then as you go along, you get better. what taught me most when I was in Special Forces, already done with this course, Airborne School and Special Forces training, was going through Jump Master course, where I did in Germany at the unit I was in. And when you go through that, that's what really built up my confidence about it, and the extra training involved in it, and the more knowledge you get, and the more confidence.
Okay.
So after a while, great, we're doing a jump, and the more you do, the better you get.
All right, so we're going to come back for a second episode here on the Fog of War and Humanity with Mike McClure and his experience as being a Special Forces NCO in the United States Army. Please come back.